The morning sun cast long shadows across Forward Operating Base Kepler as Commander Jiwan checked her watch for the third time in 5 minutes. The alien transport would arrive soon, and everything had to be perfect. She wore her best dress uniform, with all her medals polished until they gleamed like stars. Behind her stood 20 of her finest Marines in perfect formation. The base buzzed with nervous energy. Cook staff had prepared meals that might appeal to alien digestive systems. Engineers had modified the main briefing room to accommodate beings much larger than humans. Medical teams stood ready with xenobiology equipment they hoped they would never need to use. Everyone knew this first meeting could determine whether humanity gained powerful allies or dangerous enemies. Marine Sergeant Huna stood in the back row of the formation, looking completely relaxed. Her combat armor bore scratches and scorch, marks from recent battles, but she had cleaned it as best she could. At barely 5 feet tall, she looked tiny compared to some of her fellow Marines, but Commander Jiwan knew appearances could be deceiving. Huna had fought in more battles than soldiers twice her age and lived to tell about all of them. The alien ship appeared in the sky like a silver needle against the blue morning. It made no sound as it descended toward the landing pad. The hull seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal. No visible weapons or engines marked its surface, yet it moved with perfect control. Several Marines muttered prayers under their breath as they watched technology far beyond human understanding settle gently on the concrete pad. A section of the ship simply melted away to form a ramp. The first alien to emerge made everyone take a step backward. It stood nearly 10 feet tall with blue skin that sparkled like crushed sapphires. 4 powerful arms moved with liquid grace, while compound eyes swept the assembled humans. Its mouth contained rows of teeth that looked designed for tearing rather than speaking. 3 more aliens followed the first one down the ramp. Each one was slightly different in height and coloring, but all shared the same intimidating presence. They moved like predators studying potential prey. The translator devices they wore around their necks looked like delicate jewelry, but Commander Jiwan knew they contained technology that could process dozens of languages instantly. The lead alien stepped forward and spoke in a voice like distant thunder. The translator converted his words into perfectly clear English after a brief delay. "I am Ambassador Kelthara of the Vorthak Empire. We come seeking dialogue with the human military leadership." His 4 eyes focused on Commander Jiwan with uncomfortable intensity. Commander Jiwan stepped forward and saluted in the crisp military style. "Welcome to Forward Operating Base Kepler, Ambassador Kelthara. I am Commander Jiwan of the Human Colonial Marines. We are honored by your presence and look forward to productive discussions between our peoples." The formal introductions continued, as planned. Each Marine was presented by name and rank while the aliens observed everything with keen interest. They seemed particularly fascinated by the variety of human appearances and the different types of equipment each soldier carried. Their compound eyes missed nothing as they cataloged weapons, armor, and personal items. When the introductions reached Huna, the alien ambassador paused. Something about her caught his attention in a way the others had not. She stood perfectly, still under his examination, showing no sign of nervousness or fear. Her dark eyes met his compound gaze without flinching. Most humans looked away when Vorthak studied them too closely, but this small female held his stare with calm confidence. Ambassador Kelthara had conquered dozens of worlds and faced countless enemy warriors. His species could read combat experience through subtle body language and chemical sense that other beings were unaware of. This tiny human radiated something that made his 4 hearts beat faster. She carried herself like a veteran killer despite her harmless appearance. The Vorthak had specific customs for greeting fellow warriors. Combat experience demanded respect regardless of species or size. Ambassador Kelthara decided to follow traditional protocol even though he was dealing with an unknown alien race. Through his translator, he asked the question that was both greeting and challenge among his people. "Small warrior, what is your kill count?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield. Commander Jiwan felt her stomach drop as she realized the diplomatic situation had just become much more complicated. The other Marines shifted nervously as they waited to see how Huna would respond to such a direct question about her combat record. Huna tilted her head slightly to one side in a gesture that somehow conveyed both confusion and consideration. She looked at the towering alien as if he had asked about the weather or the time of day. Her voice carried no trace of boasting or false modesty when she answered, "This year or just this planet." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the background hum of base equipment seemed to quiet as everyone processed what they had just heard. The translator worked frantically to ensure it had rendered the human words correctly. Ambassador Kelthara blinked all four eyes in sequence as his brain struggled to interpret the response. The other Vorthak delegates leaned toward each other and began rapid conversations in their own language. Their translator devices were not configured for private speech, so the humans could hear fragments of excited alien words. The tone suggested surprise, confusion, and growing concern. Commander Jiwan closed her eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. She had served alongside Huna for over 2 years and knew the young sergeant had an unusual service record. But hearing her casually ask for clarification about kill count categories in front of alien diplomats made the reality hit home in a new way. The Vorthak had expected either boasting or deflection from the human warrior. In their culture, young soldiers might claim a few dozen kills while veterans could reach the hundreds. The greatest heroes of their species spoke of numbers in the low thousands accumulated over entire lifetimes of warfare. But this small human had asked for clarification between yearly totals and planetary totals. The implications were staggering. If she needed to categorize her kills by time period and location, then the overall numbers must be beyond anything the Vorthak had encountered before. Ambassador Kelthara found his voice again, though it carried less confidence than before. "Perhaps we should start with this planet," he managed to say, while his secondary hearts raced with a mixture of fear and fascination. The diplomatic mission had taken an unexpected turn that would change everything his species thought they knew about humanity. Sergeant Huna looked down at the small display on her left wrist and began scrolling through recent mission reports with casual efficiency. The device showed dozens of entries organized by date, location, and threat classification. She studied the information like a student checking homework answers rather than someone discussing matters of life and death. Ambassador Kelthara watched this process with growing unease. In Vorthak culture, warriors memorized their kill counts and recited them with pride during formal ceremonies. The greatest heroes could name every opponent they had defeated and describe the circumstances of each victory. But this human was consulting electronic records as if the numbers were too large to remember accurately. "Let me see," Huna said while continuing to scroll through data. The Zephyrian invasion 3 months ago brought about 800 confirmed kills. Then we had the Ravager swarm incident last month, which added maybe 1,200 more. The pirate raids have been constant, so probably another 600 mixed hostiles across various engagements. Each number hit the assembled Vorthak like physical blows. In their military tradition, a seasoned warrior might accumulate 50 confirmed kills over decades of service. Elite soldiers could reach the hundreds after lifetime careers filled with major campaigns. The numbers this small human was citing for just a few months of routine duty exceeded what their greatest war heroes achieved in entire lifetimes. The other Vorthak delegates had stopped their private conversations and were staring at Huna with expressions that mixed disbelief with growing alarm. Their compound eyes tracked her movements as she continued reviewing her records. Several of them took subtle steps backward as if distance might provide safety from whatever they were learning about human military capability. "Oh, and the Hive Queen incident 2 weeks ago," Hyuna continued with the same matter-of-fact tone she might use to discuss grocery shopping. "That was substantial." She paused on the word substantial in a way that made it sound like a massive understatement. The casual delivery somehow made the implied numbers more terrifying than dramatic boasting would have been. Captain Minho had been watching the alien reactions with professional interest. He served as Huna's commanding officer and had access to her complete service record, including classified operations. The numbers she was sharing represented only the easily verifiable kills from major engagements. Her actual total would be significantly higher when including individual eliminations, patrol actions, and indirect casualties. Ambassador Kelthara felt his legs growing weak as he processed the implications. His intelligence network had reported on the Hive Queen incident, but with details that now seemed woefully incomplete. According to Vorthak sources, an entire moon-sized biological weapon had simply vanished from all sensor networks. The official report suggested massive human fleet action with orbital bombardment and coordinated ground assault by multiple divisions. But this single Marine was discussing it as a personal accomplishment. The word substantial carried weight that suggested numbers beyond easy calculation. Ambassador Kelthara began to suspect that human military reports deliberately understated their capabilities to avoid frightening potential allies. The translator, devices worn by the Vorthak delegation, were sophisticated machines capable of processing complex linguistic patterns and cultural context. But they struggled with the casual way Hyuna discussed violence on an industrial scale. The software kept flagging potential translation errors because the numbers seemed impossible for individual combat performance. How many soldiers participated in these operations? Ambassador Kelthara asked, hoping to discover that these numbers represented team efforts rather than individual achievements. Hyuna looked up from her display with mild surprise at the question. Most of these were solo assignments or small unit actions, she replied. The Zephyrian invasion was handled by me and Corporal Deho, though he got injured early, so I managed most of the cleanup myself. 2 soldiers had eliminated an invasion force of 30,000 elite Zephyrian warriors. Ambassador Kelthara felt his worldview crumbling as he tried to process this information. The Zephyrians were renowned throughout the galaxy as fierce fighters with advanced technology and superior numbers. 30,000 of them should have required massive military response to defeat. Captain Minho decided to provide additional context that he hoped might help the aliens understand human military doctrine. Our standard operating procedure emphasizes efficiency and resource management, he explained. Sergeant Hyuna represents typical performance levels for colonial marine personnel. Her numbers are certainly respectable but not exceptional by our current standards. The word typical made 2 of the Vorthak delegates excuse themselves from the briefing room. They stumbled toward the exit while speaking rapidly in their native language. The translator devices caught fragments suggesting panic and urgent need to contact their home government with updated threat assessments. Hyuna continued scrolling through her records while the remaining aliens struggled to maintain their composure. The Ravager swarm was more challenging, she noted conversationally. They adapt their tactics quickly and reproduce during combat encounters. You have to maintain a certain elimination rate just to prevent population growth from overwhelming your position. The clinical way she discussed preventing enemy reproduction through sustained killing made Ambassador Kelthara physically nauseous. His species had fought Ravager swarms before and considered them among the most dangerous threats in known space. Entire Vorthak fleets had been lost to single swarm encounters. The idea that one human could not just survive such contact but actually control swarm population growth was beyond his comprehension. Do you maintain records of off-world service as well? Captain Minho asked his subordinate. Hyuna shrugged and switched to a different section of her display. They specifically asked about this planet, she replied. But if you want the broader numbers, I can access those files too. Ambassador Kelthara realized with growing horror that the staggering statistics they had already heard represented only a small fraction of this warrior's total combat record. The numbers from one planet over a few months had already exceeded anything in Vorthak military history. The implications of her broader service record were too frightening to contemplate. The remaining alien delegates huddled together and began urgent whispered conferences. Their mission to assess human military capability was providing far more information than they had wanted to discover. Every answer raised more terrifying questions about what humanity was capable of accomplishing when they decided to apply serious military pressure. Commander Jiwan activated the main holographic display system in the briefing room after receiving urgent messages from several of her superiors. Word of the ongoing first contact situation had reached higher levels of command, and they wanted visual documentation of everything being discussed. The 3-dimensional projection system hummed to life, filling the air above the conference table with crisp blue light. Sergeant Hyuna connected her personal combat recorder to the display network, without any apparent concern about sharing classified information. Her service record automatically populated the holographic space with dozens of mission files, organized by date and threat level. Each entry contained tactical footage, sensor data, and after-action reports that painted detailed pictures of her recent military activities. The first file she selected made Ambassador Kelthera step backward despite himself. The holographic display showed overhead views of the Zephyrian invasion force as they landed on Kepler 442b 3 months earlier. 30,000 elite warriors in advanced combat armor spread across a continent-sized area with heavy weapons and air support. The tactical assessment marked it as a major threat requiring immediate response from available military assets. "You fought all of them?" Ambassador Kelthara asked while his voice carried notes of desperate hope that he had misunderstood something fundamental about the situation. Huna shook her head, causing several aliens to sigh with relief until she continued speaking. "No, I had Corporal Deho with me initially, but he caught shrapnel from an enemy grenade about 20 minutes into the engagement, so I handled the rest, alone." The holographic display switched to helmet camera footage that showed the battle from Huna's personal perspective. Ambassador Kelthara watched in growing horror as a single human moved through enemy formations like a force of nature unleashed. What should have been desperate survival against overwhelming odds looked more like methodical extermination, carried out with industrial efficiency. Huna's movements were precise, economical, and absolutely lethal. She wasted no motion and missed no opportunities. Every shot found its target, every grenade eliminated multiple enemies, every tactical decision maximized casualties while minimizing her own exposure to danger. The Zephyrian warriors fell around her in systematic waves as she advanced through their positions with relentless purpose. The aliens watched 12 hours of combat footage compressed into 30 minutes of highlights. By the end of the recording, the invasion force had been completely eliminated while Huna sustained only minor equipment damage and superficial injuries. She had accomplished what should have required an entire division of soldiers working in coordinated formations with massive logistical support. The Ravager swarm engagement was more challenging, she continued while switching to the next set of files. They adapt their tactics during combat and reproduce at exponential rates when they encounter resistance. Standard doctrine requires maintaining elimination rates above their breeding threshold, or the situation becomes uncontainable very quickly. Creepy. Tactical footage from the Ravager incident showed a nightmare scenario that made the Zephyrian battle look simple by comparison. Millions of insect-like creatures poured across the landscape in living waves that consumed everything in their path. Each individual Ravager was relatively weak, but their numbers and reproductive rate made them one of the most feared threats in known space. Huna had been dropped alone into the center of the swarm with limited ammunition and no possibility of extraction until the threat was neutralized. The helmet camera showed her moving constantly to avoid being overwhelmed while maintaining precise fire discipline. Every shot had to count because running out of ammunition would mean certain death and planetary catastrophe. The footage revealed tactical brilliance that the Vorthak military academies would study for generations. Huna used environmental advantages, explosive traps, and psychological warfare to turn the swarm's numbers against itself. She created kill zones where the creatures would funnel into overlapping fields of fire. She collapsed tunnel systems to bury entire breeding chambers. She ignited atmospheric gases to create firestorms that cleared vast areas of infestation. 1,200 confirmed kills. Ambassador Kelthera repeated in a voice barely above a whisper. The number seemed impossible for individual combat performance, but the evidence was undeniable. He had watched every elimination with his own compound eyes through footage that could not be falsified or exaggerated. Lieutenant Sora entered the briefing room carrying a secure datapad and moved directly to Commander Jiwan's position. She whispered something urgent that made the commander's expression grow serious. Perhaps Sergeant Huna should share her complete off-world service record as well, the commander suggested. The alien specifically requested assessment of human military capability. Huna looked confused by the suggestion. They asked about this. Planet specifically, she replied. But I can access the broader files if that would be helpful. Her fingers moved across the holographic interface, bringing up service records that spanned dozens of star systems and years of continuous combat operations. The numbers that appeared in the display made 2 more Vorthak delegates excuse themselves from the room. Ambassador Kelthera stared at totals that climbed into ranges his species had no words to describe. The confirmed kill count from individual combat actions exceeded the total casualties from some of the largest wars in galactic history. But even more disturbing was the systematic nature of the documentation. Every elimination was recorded, verified, and analyzed for tactical lessons. The human military treated warfare like an engineering problem to be solved through careful study and continuous improvement. Each battle made their soldiers more effective at eliminating future threats. This is standard record-keeping for colonial marine personnel, Captain Minho explained, while noting the aliens' growing distress. All combat actions are documented for training purposes and tactical development. Sergeant Huna represents competent but unremarkable performance levels by current human military standards. The word unremarkable hit Ambassador Kelthara like a physical assault. If these numbers represented average performance, then humanity possessed military capabilities that defied all previous understanding of biological warfare limitations. The implications were too terrifying to contemplate, but impossible to ignore. "How many soldiers like this do humans possess?" he asked, while knowing the answer would probably destroy what remained of his diplomatic confidence. Commander Jiwan consulted her own records before responding. "Currently, we maintain approximately 50 million active-duty military personnel across all branches of service, with reserve forces numbering in the hundreds of millions." Ambassador Kelthara felt the last of his strategic assumptions crumble into dust as he processed this final piece of information. The briefing room door opened to admit Corporal Youngji, who had been summoned from her duties in the communications center. She wore standard combat fatigues that bore the distinctive markings of Outer Rim service, including patches from 3 different stellar conflict zones. Her arrival brought fresh perspective to the ongoing discussion about human military capabilities and individual performance standards. Commander Jiwan made quick introductions while Ambassador Kelthara studied this new human with the same fascination and growing dread he had shown toward Sergeant Hyuna. Corporal Youngji appeared even younger than Hyuna despite her obvious combat experience. She moved with the fluid confidence of someone comfortable with violence, but her smile seemed genuinely friendly rather than predatory. "We were discussing individual service records," Ambassador Kelthara managed to explain while his translator converted his words into human language. "Perhaps you could share some details about your own military experience for our cultural exchange purposes." The request sounded reasonable, but everyone in the room understood he was gathering intelligence about human warfare capabilities. Youngji nodded cheerfully and activated her personal data display without hesitation. "My specialty is long-range reconnaissance and target elimination in contested space." She began while scrolling through mission files. "Most of my work involves individual operations behind enemy lines, where traditional unit tactics would not be effective." The holographic display filled with star charts, showing Youngji's deployment history across 17 different star systems. Each location was marked with engagement summaries that revealed systematic elimination of enemy command structures, communication networks, and logistical support systems. The scope of her operations suggested strategic impact far beyond what individual soldiers should be capable of achieving. The Helix Nebula campaign was particularly interesting. She continued with the same casual tone Huna had used when discussing planetary invasions. 3 enemy species had formed an alliance to block human expansion into that sector. My mission was to disable their coordination abilities before our main forces arrived. Ambassador Kelthara leaned forward, despite his growing fear of what he might learn. "How does one soldier disable coordination between entire species?" he asked, while hoping the answer would reveal limitations in human capabilities, rather than additional terrifying truths about their military doctrine. Youngji switched the display to tactical footage that showed infiltration of heavily defended command bunkers. The camera followed her as she moved through enemy installations like a ghost, eliminating sentries, disabling security systems, and planting charges with mechanical precision. Each target was chosen for maximum strategic impact, rather than simple body count. "Leadership elimination creates cascade failures in most military hierarchies," she explained, while the footage showed alien commanders dying in their sleep or vanishing during routine meetings. "Communication disruption prevents coordination, between separated forces. Supply line interdiction reduces combat effectiveness across entire theaters of operation. The systematic nature of her approach was more disturbing than simple violence. Youngji had studied each enemy species to identify their specific weaknesses, then exploited those vulnerabilities with surgical precision. The result was complete military collapse across multiple star systems, accomplished by a single human operating alone behind enemy lines. Major Taewon appeared in the holographic display through a communication link from his current assignment on the Andromeda front. His image flickered slightly due to the enormous distance, but his voice came through clearly. Commander Ji-won thought our guests might benefit from hearing about larger-scale operations, he said, while explosion sounds echoed in the background. Ambassador Kelthara stared at the human officer who was apparently conducting a briefing while active combat raged around his position. Major Taewon stood in what appeared to be a command bunker with tactical displays showing planetary liberation efforts spread across multiple worlds simultaneously. The casual way he discussed galactic-scale warfare while under fire demonstrated a level of military confidence that seemed almost supernatural. We are currently coordinating liberation efforts across 47 worlds in this sector, Major Taewon reported while pausing briefly as nearby explosions made his image shake. Resistance has been lighter than expected, with most enemy forces surrendering after initial contact with our advance units. Estimated completion time for the entire campaign is 6 weeks. 6 weeks to liberate 47 planets, Ambassador Kelthara repeated, while his mind struggled to process the implications. His own species would need years or decades to plan operations on such a scale. The logistics alone should require massive fleets and millions of soldiers working in perfect coordination across interstellar distances. Our doctrine emphasizes rapid, decisive action, Major Taewon explained, while reviewing tactical displays that showed human forces advancing on dozens of fronts simultaneously. Prolonged campaigns increase costs and casualties while providing enemies time to adapt their defensive strategies. We prefer to apply overwhelming force until resistance collapses, then move to the next objective. Captain Jinwoo joined the communication link from his position at a siege operation in the Helix Nebula. His casual report of light resistance today, with only 300 confirmed kills while artillery fire thundered behind him, drove home the reality of routine human military operations. What he described as minor skirmishing would have been considered major battles by most galactic species. The aliens began to understand why human-controlled space was expanding so rapidly across the galaxy. Every species that had challenged human expansion had either surrendered quickly, fled to distant regions, or simply ceased to exist as organized civilizations. What had seemed like diplomatic success was actually the result of overwhelming military superiority applied with methodical efficiency. Ambassador Kelthara realized that his diplomatic mission had revealed information that changed everything his species thought they knew about galactic power structures. Humans were not just another military power seeking alliances between equals. They represented a fundamental shift in the nature of warfare itself that made traditional military thinking completely obsolete. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Individual human soldiers routinely accomplished what entire alien armies could not achieve. Their military doctrine treated galactic conquest as an engineering problem to be solved through systematic application of superior techniques. Most terrifying of all, they seemed to consider these capabilities normal and unremarkable. Do all human soldiers perform at these levels? Ambassador Kelthara asked, while knowing the answer would determine whether his species had any hope of maintaining independence in a human-dominated galaxy. The response would shape diplomatic policy for generations, and possibly determine whether the Vorthak Empire would survive contact with humanity. Commander Ji-won consulted performance databases that contained records for millions of active duty personnel. These individuals represent typical competence levels for colonial marine forces, she replied. Our selection standards ensure consistent performance across all units, regardless of deployment location or mission parameters. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place as Ambassador Kelthara understood that humanity had industrialized warfare on a scale that defied comprehension. Ambassador Kelthara requested an immediate private conference with his remaining delegation members after the overwhelming display of human military capabilities. The Vorthak gathered in a secure section of their transport ship where they could speak freely without human monitoring equipment recording their conversations. The atmosphere was thick with tension and barely controlled panic as they tried to process what they had learned. The initial intelligence reports were completely wrong, declared Sub-Ambassador Velkaran while pacing nervously around the cramped meeting space. We assumed humans were typical biological warriors with standard military capabilities based on individual physical limitations and emotional factors. Instead, we have discovered a species that has evolved warfare into something approaching mathematical perfection. Ambassador Kelthara reviewed the recorded data from their briefing sessions while trying to find any evidence that the humans had been exaggerating or deceiving them. But the tactical footage was undeniably authentic, and the casual way the soldiers discussed mass elimination events suggested this was normal routine activity rather than exceptional performance worthy of boasting. Every calculation in our strategic assessment requires fundamental revision, he admitted, while studying kill count statistics that exceeded the total military casualties from the largest wars in Vorthak history. We came here seeking alliance between equals, but the evidence suggests we are dealing with a species that could eliminate us without significant effort or resource expenditure. The implications extended far beyond simple military concerns. Human expansion across the galaxy was not driven by desperate survival needs or territorial ambition. They possessed such overwhelming superiority that conquest was merely a matter of administrative convenience. Species that opposed them were eliminated with the same casual efficiency humans might use to clear weeds from agricultural fields. Meanwhile, in the Human Command Center, Commander Jiwan was conducting her own urgent communications with higher levels of military leadership. Admiral Sunwoo observed the diplomatic situation from Fleet Command Headquarters while reviewing intelligence assessments about Vorthak capabilities and intentions. The aliens had specifically requested evaluation of human military strength and were receiving exactly what they had asked for. They wanted to measure our capabilities through individual soldier performance, Admiral Sunwoo noted with obvious amusement. The cultural research suggested this was standard protocol for their species when establishing military hierarchies and alliance terms. They appear to be getting more information than they expected to handle comfortably. The reality was even more complex than the aliens had yet realized. Sergeant Hyuna represented competent but entirely unremarkable performance by human military standards. Her service record, while impressive to alien observers, placed her somewhere in the middle ranges of her unit's capability assessments. Dozens of soldiers in her battalion had higher kill counts and thousands more across human space maintained comparable statistics. Private Kayumin, the youngest member of Hyuna's unit, had accumulated more confirmed eliminations in 6 months of service than most alien species achieved during entire military careers spanning decades. His performance was considered adequate for recent recruit standards, but nothing that would earn special recognition or advancement opportunities. The human military machine was not just efficient, but scalable in ways that defied traditional understanding of biological warfare limitations. Training programs could produce soldiers with devastating individual capabilities in matters of months rather than years. Weapons technology and tactical doctrine evolved constantly, as lessons from each engagement were analyzed and incorporated into standard operating procedures. Combat experience gained by individual humans was immediately shared across their entire military structure through sophisticated data networks and training systems. What one soldier learned through battlefield experience quickly became standard knowledge for all personnel. This created exponential improvement in overall military effectiveness that accelerated with each new conflict. Admiral Sunwoo accessed classified reports about human military operations across dozens of star systems while considering how much information to share with the alien delegation. The truth was that current deployments represented only a small fraction of human military capacity. Most personnel were engaged in training exercises, exploration missions, or garrison duties rather than active combat operations. The expanding human territory was not the result of massive military campaigns requiring total mobilization of available forces. Instead, it represented routine activities by relatively small numbers of soldiers who encountered minimal resistance from species that quickly recognized the futility of opposition. Most worlds surrendered after brief demonstrations of human capabilities, rather than attempting serious military resistance. Back aboard the Vorthak transport, Ambassador Kelthara was reaching conclusions that would reshape his species' relationship with humanity for generations to come. The diplomatic mission had revealed that traditional concepts of military balance and negotiated settlements were completely irrelevant when dealing with humans. They possessed such overwhelming advantages that any conflict would result in Vorthak extinction within weeks or months. "We have 3 options," he announced to his delegation while reviewing their increasingly limited choices. "We can attempt to maintain independence and face inevitable elimination when human expansion reaches our territory. We can flee to distant regions of the galaxy and hope they never consider us worth pursuing. Or we can seek subordinate alliance status and hope they find us useful enough to preserve." The discussion that followed was brief and decisive. Fleeing would only delay the inevitable while providing no long-term security for Vorthak civilization. Attempting resistance would guarantee immediate destruction based on the overwhelming evidence of human military superiority. Only alliance offered any hope of survival, even if it meant accepting vassal status under human oversight. Sub-Ambassador Vel Karan began drafting treaty documents that would essentially surrender Vorthak military independence in exchange for protection and limited self-governance. The terms were humiliating by traditional diplomatic standards, but represented the only realistic option for species survival in a galaxy increasingly dominated by human expansion. Meanwhile, other alien civilizations were beginning to receive intelligence reports about the ongoing first contact negotiations. The implications of what the Vorthak were learning spread rapidly through diplomatic networks, as species across the galaxy realized that their assumptions about human capabilities had been dangerously inadequate. Ambassador Kelthara prepared to return to the human base with treaty proposals that would acknowledge humanity as the dominant military power in their region of space. The negotiations would establish precedents that other species would be forced to follow as human influence continued expanding across the galaxy at an accelerating pace. The age of human galactic dominance was beginning, and no species had the military capacity to prevent or significantly delay its inevitable completion. The final revelation came when Sergeant Hyuna offered to show the Vorthak delegation what she called her quiet days during the past month. These were routine patrol missions and peacekeeping operations that she barely considered worth mentioning in her official reports. The casual way she dismissed these activities suggested they involved minimal combat and standard security duties that any soldier might handle. Ambassador Kelthara accepted the offer, hoping to finally see evidence of human limitations or vulnerability. Perhaps during routine operations without major threats, the true scope of individual capabilities would be revealed as more modest than the extraordinary battles they had already witnessed. The helmet camera footage might show normal patrol activities that would restore some sense of proportional military power. The recording began with Hyuna conducting what appeared to be a standard security sweep of mining installations in the outer territories. Her equipment loadout was deliberately minimal, with basic weapons, limited ammunition, and no orbital support available for emergency assistance. She moved through the terrain with relaxed confidence while monitoring communication channels for routine status reports. "This is what we call light duty," she explained while the footage showed her systematically clearing a fortified compound that contained several dozen heavily armed pirates. No backup forces, limited ammunition, basic equipment. Only. The restrictions she listed as operational limitations would have been considered significant advantages for most species' elite military units. The tactical footage revealed methodical elimination of hostile forces with efficiency that made the previous battle recordings seem almost restrained by comparison. Without heavy weapons or specialized equipment, Hyuna adapted to available resources and environmental advantages with frightening creativity. Every improvised solution resulted in multiple enemy casualties, while she sustained no significant injuries. "Standard operating procedure for patrol actions," Captain Minho commented, while noting the aliens' obvious distress at watching routine police work that resembled major military operations. "Individual initiative and resource management are emphasized during training to ensure consistent performance regardless of support availability or equipment limitations. The pirates had been well armed with military-grade weapons and defensive positions that should have required coordinated assault by multiple squads to overcome safely. Instead, a single human had eliminated the entire organization during what she considered a routine patrol stop that barely warranted detailed reporting to higher command levels. Ambassador Kel Thera watched 12 more recordings of similar patrol incidents spread across several weeks of normal duty assignments. Each engagement involved threats that would have challenged entire Vorthak military units, but were handled by one human as minor inconveniences during otherwise peaceful security sweeps. The cumulative effect was more disturbing than the spectacular battle footage they had seen earlier. This footage represents typical daily operations for colonial marine personnel, Commander Jiwan explained while accessing performance databases that contained similar records for thousands of other soldiers. Individual competence at this level ensures mission success regardless of unexpected circumstances or equipment failures that might compromise traditional military doctrine. The Vorthak delegation finally understood the true scope of human military evolution. They were not witnessing exceptional warriors or elite special forces units performing remarkable feats under extraordinary circumstances. Instead, they were observing normal soldiers conducting routine activities that demonstrated capabilities beyond anything their species had considered possible for biological entities. Every human in military service represented a potential extinction event for conventional alien forces. Their training programs produced individuals who could eliminate threats that would challenge entire traditional armies. Most terrifying of all, they seemed completely unaware that their abilities were unusual by galactic standards. Ambassador Kel Thera made his final decision about the diplomatic relationship between their species. The Vorthak Empire would not merely seek alliance with humanity, but would request subordinate status under human military protection and guidance. The alternative of attempting independence was too dangerous to